Hong Kong Creeper. This happened when I was in Hong Kong for a vacation earlier this year. I was there with 3 other female friends, and we were at a factory outlet mall. My friends and I had just left the Adidas store, thinking of where to go next. Suddenly, this short Hong Konger rushes up towards me to my face and stops when he's almost invading my personal zone. He looks at me intently in the eye and points at me. At the point when I was getting rather whoa and backing off, he mutters something in rather heavily accented English. I gave a confused, retarded huh? Because it didn't catch what he'd said. Then he says, slowly, through gritted teeth, "That guy." He jabs his thumb very discreetly behind him, still staring at me in the eye intently. "Is taking picture." I looked at my friends, wanting to give them a what's with this guy look, but they were all looking at the guy, who was still glaring at me. "Of you." At the last "you," he jabs his finger at me. My wise eyed and I looked up. There the creep was. He was also quite tiny. Okay, maybe I'm kinda tall for an Asian girl, with a shaven head, and was all kinds of creepy. He looked normal at first glance, but I soon realized that, although most of his body was leaning on the metal railing and glass panel, he was turned towards my/our direction, and his phone was aimed towards me. I didn't get a good look, but I was sure he was staring at his phone with his greedy, slightly manic look on his face. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes had this sparkly quality to it. You know, an eye smile? I think he saw through his screen that I was staring at him, looking really freaked out, because he glanced at me for a split second before hurriedly withdrawing his phone. Being an awkward person, I flushed red, without even paying attention to the guy who had alerted me. I was so scared. All I wanted to do was nope the hell out of there. I grabbed my nearest friend's arm, blubbered, "Oh my god, let's go," and booked it out of there. Just before I sped away, I saw, from the corner of my eye, the guy who had warned me look at me very seriously and called out, "You take care of yourself." I was too anxious, creeped out, and embarrassed to even respond. My friends seemed to take the whole thing really lightly, laughing as we sped away. One of them exclaiming, "That's okay, it means we're pretty." I think I rolled my eyes at how lame that statement was. But it calmed me a little, as it made me feel a little better that maybe he wasn't taking pictures of just me. I know. I ducked into a random clothing store, hid behind a rack of clothes, and looked out. The creepy guy was gone. To you, I may be overthinking. I didn't in front of my friends because I didn't want to appear weird. I didn't know why I was so embarrassed and creeped out, you know? However, I am really grateful to that guy who told me about the creepy guy. I don't know if you got that in the beginning, but I thought he was a weirdo for coming up so close to me. Turns out, he just wanted to very quietly and discreetly warn me. Had he not, my friends and I might have stood there for God knows how long, and the guy would have happily snapped away. I'm also glad that the creeper didn't follow us or anything like that, or at least I hope he didn't. Being an awkward person of average looks, I always thought of how flattering it would be should a stranger be attracted to my looks. I know, shameless, low self-esteem-ish, whatever. But now that I think of it, thinking if I were to be someone's fat material, it just sickens me to the bone. I know, judge not lest ye be judged, not a Christian, so forgive me if I used the phrase wrongly. But when I picture that creepy little guy, I think of him in his room, surrounded by blurry, pixelated printed pictures of girls that give him boners, and fapping off to them. It sickens me. Woman with a butt obsession. This isn't really a creepy encounter, but more of a weird one. I'm a long-time lurker but first-time poster, so sorry for any mistakes. This takes place in the city of Hong Kong, China, where I'm currently on vacation. Hong Kong is a busy and highly populated city, so at times, you'll have to walk literally beside someone else. Today I was in the MTR station, which is like a train subway station, with my dad, when we walked onto the escalator. Some of the escalators here are pretty long, so it's possible that you'd have to wait 1 or 2 minutes before reaching the end. Being a tourist, I always wanted to look around, even at the advertisements, so that was what I was doing while waiting to go up. I started looking at the ads on the sides of the walls when the woman in front of me caught my eye. She was in her 40s and was holding her phone up with her arm extended for an unusually long time, even for a selfie, so I wanted to see what she was doing. Now, as I said before, this is a highly populated city, and this was a busy day, so I was standing on the step right below her, giving me a clear view of her screen. When I saw what was on her screen, I was immediately weirded out. She was taking pictures of people's butts. She would focus on a group of people, then zoom in on their pants. After another picture or two, it was clear that she hadn't taken these pictures by accident. Without thinking, I said to my dad, who was beside me, I think the lady in front of us is a pervert. She's taking pictures of people's butts. To confirm my suspicion, after my remark, the woman turned around and looked at me with a "I've just been caught" look, and thrusted her phone into her bag. When we got off the escalator, the train had come, and the woman looked back at me again and immediately ran into the nearest cart, which was about 5 steps away. There was no reason to run, as the train would stay at each station for a minute or so after it arrived, and the group of people in front of us were not headed for the train. I'm not sure what she intended to do with those pictures, and I probably don't want to know, but after seeing the subjects of your photography, lady with a butt obsession, let's not meet. Instinct or paranoia? Okay, so I just remembered this, and I knew I wanted to share it with you guys, because we're into this shit, right? It's a memory I've suppressed for a long time, but now and then, it comes scratching back up the surface, and leads me down a spiral of what ifs. Last summer, around the beginning of August, I went to Seoul, Korea for a 3-day impromptu trip. I should mention that I'm half Korean. My mom and I got off the flight and made our way to the train to take us to the other part of the airport. Here's where things get a bit fuzzy. I'm not sure when I noticed this man. I think it was on our flight from Hong Kong to Korea. But something wasn't right. He was this fat, balding, sweaty white man, around the ages of 40 to 55, maybe, and he wore this light teal sparkly blazer, or it was light blue, whatever it was hideous, and an offense against humanity. He was traveling with these 2 young girls. The youngest was around 5 to 6 years old, and the oldest was maybe 8. They looked mixed, like Korean and white like me, or some Asian and some white combination. At first, I thought they might be related in some way, and that they were way too cute to be related to this guy, but it can't happen. What unsettled me was their demeanor. They were extremely quiet from the whole flight, and didn't look at all happy. This didn't change when we got off the plane as well. I saw the 2 girls holding on to each other, and the older sister would not let go of her little sister's hand. My suspicions peaked on the escalator ride. They were riding in front of us, so I could hear him speaking. I also took into account that he had no wedding ring on. I can't really remember what he said, but it was along the lines of, "We're gonna go to the hotel, wash up, and get changed into our jammies." Actually, that's fairly accurate to what he said. It's amazing how much I buried that I'm covering typing this stuff. Now you may be thinking, oh man, she's just exaggerating her paranoia, but I wasn't the only one who noticed. A few times I caught my mom staring at them with a look. Just one of these, "I really hope that isn't what I think it is" looks. When we got off the train, I mentioned to her, and she fully agreed that something wasn't right in this picture. He may have been their grandfather or someone very close to them, and I just misread the whole situation, but these kids look so unhappy to be with him. They look completely helpless. I looked online a few days after for any missing child reports, but nothing really came up. It doesn't sit right with me, and not knowing eats me up inside. I can still picture his smile. I am an English teacher, and because of my profession, I have been to several countries outside of the United States. A few weeks ago, I was in Hong Kong teaching a group of Cantonese teenagers English for a month. It was a very rewarding experience, but my last night in Hong Kong made me apprehensive to leave my apartment ever again. I have been to Hong Kong before, so when it was time for me to head back, I was not at all shy of the fast-paced city life it provided. My mother, on the other hand, was nervous. She mentioned several times that I shouldn't leave the group to wander off alone, and that I need to always be aware of my surroundings. And she ended up with a joke about a friend of hers who rescues women from the sex slave industry. At the time, it was hilarious, and after reminding that Hong Kong is one of the safest cities in the world, I was off. Now, I stand out in Asian countries. I'm a 5'8" pale with light eyes and hair, and I am well endowed with plenty of natural assets. Basically, I stuck out like a sore thumb. Whenever I left the hostel, I would notice a plenty of men gawking at my chest or staring for too long, but I never let it really bother me, because no one made any advances. I was having a grand old time all summer, and it felt completely safe. Until my last night in the city, that is. My students wanted to take me out to dinner my last night, so I met them near their homes. I don't remember the exact MTR stop we met at, but it opened up to a night market and was a few blocks away from a very popular mall called Dragon Center. We stood around the opening of the MTR station as we waited for the last few students to arrive, when I started to notice that I was getting a little bit too much attention to be comfortable. A boy with a microphone who was advertising a TV noticed me and called out to me during his sales pitch, and then several men from India or surrounding countries started to take notice as well. The men from India were obviously wealthy. One man, who was particularly bold, blew kisses at me as he longingly assessed my body and motioned for me to join him in a sex shop a few yards away. I felt violated, but more angry that he would do that while I was standing with 6 teenagers and children. I turned in a huff to leave and walked to the restaurant, and that's when I noticed the first man. He, of Jamaican or Caribbean island descent, and he stuck out in the crowd more than I did. He locked eyes with me, and his lips curled into a smile as he made a show of me looking up and down. Without breaking eye contact, he pulled out a phone and began speaking it in another language. I rolled my eyes and urged my kids to start the half-mile trek to the restaurant. I didn't want to make them nervous, so I did my best to blow off what was happening. After the first block, I turned to see that the man on the phone was following us, and he was still locked in on me. I grabbed my umbrella from my bag and held it just in case. I turned around again after the second and third block, and he kept his pace even with ours, still talking away in another language on the phone, and still staring me down with a lusty smile on his lips. Finally, my students and I neared the restaurant, and I turned to see the man stop and hang up the phone. He gave me one last look before he winked and turned to walk away. I was fuming at this point. This guy was ruining my last night with my students. It wasn't until I turned back to the restaurant that I saw the group appear from out of thin air. They were all the same ethnic origin as the man who followed me on the phone. They were staring directly at me. All my senses were screaming red alert by that point. I gripped my umbrella tighter and held it like a baseball bat in case they approached me or my students. The man chuckled at me and waited until my students walked into the restaurant. I went in last, after making they were all safe inside, and turned back one last time to see a man from the group directly behind me. He towered over me. His eyes bulged out of his face and his lips cut into a deep, menacing smile against his cheeks. He leaned down so his eye level with me, and then slowly started to wave at me. As I backstepped and stumbled into the restaurant, I could tell by the look on his face exactly what was happening. I was the prey, and they were hunting me. I couldn't relax after that. My students and I sat down in the restaurant, and I tried to enjoy my meal, but I looked up several times to see the men hanging around the door. It took about an hour and a half before they finally disappeared. I walked outside with my students and looked around closely, but I couldn't see them anymore, except for one who was standing at the end of the road. I couldn't afford a taxi, and I certainly wasn't going to leave my kids to fend for themselves after this, so I grabbed them by their arms, and we hightailed it back to the MTR station. I still don't think they realized exactly what was going on, but I know they realized that I was nervous. Anyways, we made it back without seeing the men again, and I was careful to watch for them in case they tried to follow me again. I was honestly convinced that I was going to end up kidnapped or killed my last night in Hong Kong. I made it home without any issues, thankfully, and all my students made it home safe, too. So, group of guys who followed me through the streets of Hong Kong and smiled to me like I was an injured gazelle and they were lions. Let's not meet. Ignorance is not bliss. Human Trafficking Edition. Now, I've been a long-time lurker of this sub, but thankfully, never had anything worthy of posting. So unfortunately, that changed a couple weeks ago. I'm not much of a storyteller, so bear with. For a little bit of background information, I'm a junior in college, originally from the US, studying abroad in Hong Kong. Though battling a minor language barrier, I immediately fell in love with a vibrant city. It didn't take long to feel at home and get familiar with my surroundings. After a matter of weeks, I was practically a local. I'm reluctant to say that in exchange for feeling so comfortable in the area, I may have let my guard down in the process. Being a 5'6", 120-pound female, I recognize the importance of staying vigilant, especially when venturing out of my town. Though pretty athletic, I'm not much of a threat against anyone that may want to hurt me, which leads me to the encounter I had some weeks ago. I decided to head over to a small mall to kill time one afternoon while my friends were in class. When I say small, I mean in comparison to some of the massive retail metropolises located elsewhere in the city. This place was still no joke. I had begun to frequent this mall, as it was not a far trip and an easy place to visit with a couple hours to spare, so I knew the place pretty well. Also important, Hong Kong is fairly diverse compared to most places in Asia, but being blonde and white, I get a lot of stares. I'm usually one of few if any white people around whenever I leave campus, especially in the areas with small numbers of tourists. This makes other people of the same race stand out to me in a crowd as well, which is why that afternoon, I had noticed 2 white men showing up in the small places I was. Now, before you roll your eyes, this mall is good sized, but small enough where that wasn't particularly unusual. A lot of the major stores are in the same area, so I figured they were shopping around like I was. I didn't get that eerie I'm being watched feeling, and I wasn't sure they were even looking at me. I hadn't caught them looking my way even once. Besides, I have a pretty good sixth sense about those kinds of situations. After growing up in some major cities, my parents made damn sure stranger danger was ingrained into my brain as a child, and that I knew exactly what to do if I found myself in trouble. I was aware of the men, but I wasn't worried about the men. An hour or so after I had noticed the 2 men, I was milling around Starbucks and a few shopping bags in hand, most people watching at this point and debating whether or not it was time to go back to campus. To avoid the crowd and getting bumped into, I went slightly out of the way to walk through a quieter walkway that passed by a couple luxury stores and an exit. Now, let me emphasize, there were still plenty of people around. They just happened to be further to my right, while the luxury stores and exit were to my left. Now I'm still wandering around, lost in my thoughts, when someone coming to my right bumps into me. Seriously? With all this empty space around? But this time, there were fingernails digging into my ribcage. They hadn't just bumped into me, they latched on. Whoever it was behind me, and I walked perpendicular to my previous path. Their right hand was positioned under my right arm, pushing and pulling me with them, To any passerby, he was positioned strategically enough that you probably couldn't even tell what was going on. He knew exactly what he was doing. It took me a minute to register what was happening, since I couldn't see the assailant from my position behind me. Once I snapped out of it, I was stunned. I stumbled along with him for a moment, trying to shake loose. This guy was strong. Victim to his steel-tight grip, all 120 pounds of me was not going anywhere besides exactly where he wanted me. Fear seized my body and mind as his massive grip tightened and those long fingernails delved deeper into my skin. Then, a confident, gravelly voice that was enough to make anyone's skin crawl barked into my ear. "Do not fight. I will win." At this point, I'm panicking. I manage to look behind me, and what do I see but one of the 6'5" white muscle men from before. He snarls at me and slams his left hand in the same position under my left arm. I look towards where we're headed and see the other equally as monstrous white man posted up waiting for us, right under the illuminated sign that read, "Exit." I heard a family's friend who used to live in Hong Kong's voice in my head. "You will see sex trafficking while you're there. It's everywhere. But as long as you're careful, you'll be fine." A warning he had heeded before I left. Fuck. Suddenly, that panic that created a fog around my brain turned into pure adrenaline. I was no longer scared. I was pissed. Not thinking, rather operating on autopilot, I garnered a strength I didn't know I had and ripped free from the kidnapper's grip. I would like to say I ran like hell to get help, but again, this was my hyped-up adrenaline-ridden brain acting. I whipped around, mere feet away from my attacker, and glared at this man as if saying, "Try that shit again, I dare you." If looks could kill, he looked absolutely stunned that I managed to pull free. But at this point, the interaction was no longer disguised as a normal encounter. More people were around, and without the opportunity to make it appear as if I was acting on my own accord, he knew he missed his chance. He glared back momentarily, but motioned to his buddy, and they booked it out of the exit without their intended target. Just as fast as it had come, the adrenaline rush was gone. I was shaking uncontrollably, fighting back tears, his touch burning into my flesh, long after he had gone. I looked around me, stunned. No one had stopped to help, or even witnessed what had just happened. It took a moment to compose myself physically. My mental state was another story, and slowly and vigilantly walked my shaking self back to the bus that would return to my safe haven on campus. Well, I can't say for certain what his intentions were. I have a pretty good guess. I can only pray the next girl is as lucky as I.